Hi, I'm Jim Clark, Visual Arts Manager here at Hopkins Center for the Arts. Today we're speaking with Gail Wallinga about her exhibition, Emergence, Creativity, Illness, and Healing. Gail, welcome.
Hi, Jim. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks to everybody who's here today.
Sure. Can you tell us about the inspiration for this body of work? I know it's quite personal.
Sure. There's a few different pieces of inspiration for this work since it covers a span of time. And so this first series of paintings was right after I finally received the right diagnosis from the medical community. I'd been having health problems for a long time and nobody could figure out what was wrong. And I was actually quite relieved. Wasn't thrilled that I had Lyme disease, but at least I had an answer. And so for the first series, let me back up a bit. I was at a point in my art making where I wasn't sure what was next. I had finished the previous series and I was sort of in an in-between state. And so after the diagnosis, I thought, great, I'm going to do a series of paintings about this. And then as my health declined, that was still sort of my inspiration. These black and white pieces, I really wasn't thinking about much at all. It was just a drive to make something. And after that, I got really, really, really sick, and I couldn't really do much of anything. And it was at that time that I got the idea to make sculptures out of the medical supplies once I got better enough to be able to do that. And back then I thought that if I was ever well enough to pull together a show, that I wanted it to be about Lyme disease, because there's a lot of controversy about Lyme disease. There's a lot of disagreements in the medical community. But as time went on, my health started improving. I realized that I didn't want it to be that specific, that I wanted it to be more broad, more encompassing, because there's so many people who live with chronic illness of many kinds and who live with invisible disability of many kinds. And so my hope was that, yes, it's about my specific journey, but also that other folks could relate to it.
Gail, did you have, it sounds like you had an existing artistic practice prior to your illness.
Yes,
Yeah.
I had started painting in about 2003.
Okay.
And I got diagnosed correctly in 2012. So not a ton of experience, but
Sure.
But I was feeling pretty good about my skills and sort of how I was moving along. And before that, I had mostly done photography when I was much younger, and then I went to design school, and so a lot of my creative energy went into the graphic design that I did in my profession. But I discovered that doing graphic design didn't fulfill all of my creative needs, and that I needed something else. And so then I started making art again, but it took me a while to find sort of a medium that was a good fit. Sure. I thought I was going to be a art furniture maker. This was in the early 2000s, I think. But I got an injury, and so I realized I can't do things that are that physical. I need to find an art form that's easier on my body, and then that's when I started painting.
Sure. Can you describe some of the differences between your graphic design experience and vocation versus your we'll say fine art pursuits? Because I know a lot of people think of graphic design, and some think of it as an individual art form because it's aesthetic and it's visual. And did you pursue graphic design as a career because originally you were looking at art and decided to look for something that was, a more stable paycheck? I mean, because that's a common story.
Yeah.
Is it does that relate to your story?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a family where my parents were very, very practical. And so creative pursuits weren't really encouraged other than a hobby. And so when I first went to college, my major was psychology, but I was taking fine art courses, a variety, and I realized about the time I was ending my degree that I enjoyed the art courses much more than the psychology courses. And so I wasn't sure what to do next. And I went to work in a record store because I loved music, and I thought, well, maybe I'll own a record store one day. And one of my jobs in the record store was to make displays with the promotional materials that the record companies would send us. And it was a chain of stores, and so they had contests for the stores in the chain. And I started winning the contests. And I thought, what is this that I seem to have a knack for? And because I wasn't really aware of graphic design before that. I mean, I'm sure I had seen it, but I wasn't aware of it as a profession. And so I did some research and went back to school to study design. And I think some of it is also my, just my personality, that I wanted more certainty. I didn't want to, I wanted more certainty in terms of what I was doing for a living.
You're not just blaming your parents.
Yeah, I'm not just blaming my parents. I know, that wasn't fair. So the difference is with graphic design, at least with the clients I had, it's all for the client, and as it should be, because they're usually running a business or an organization, and they're trying to get the word out. They're trying to communicate something about their business or organization. And so my job was to help them accomplish that. And I enjoyed that. I liked that it was communicating, and I liked that it was visual. Yeah.
And it activated your aesthetic sensibility on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Did you also keep a personal art making practice parallel to your day job, or did you find that you were engaging your aesthetic sensibilities in a satisfactory amount during your day job, and then you went to the fine art after transitioning away from that? Is that?
Yeah, it was, let me think back. Initially, when I got out of art school, design school, I was just focused on doing the design work, trying to figure out how does one be a graphic designer in the world, and learning all the ropes that way. So I think it was a few years in, maybe about 4, that I started realizing that it wasn't fulfilling all of my creative needs. And I wasn't ready to leave the field, although I did wonder. But I figured out, no, I like design. It's something that I feel good about doing, and I had a knack for it. And so then I started pursuing other artistic, although I was doing photography all the way through.
Okay.
But not in a very consistent way. Yeah, more so like if I went on a vacation or something.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And so this is about 2003. You really committed to your art practice.
In a different way, yeah.
In a different way prior to your illness. Did the work look different at that time?
Yes. Well, I was a beginner, right? So
Sure.
there was so much to learn. And I was grateful that I did have my design training to kind of bring to painting, about composition and color and all the different principles of design. The first series, I love working in series. And so the first series was called Inner Rhythm, and it was about the topic of connection, whether it's connecting with parts of oneself or connecting with other people. And at that same time, I was taking a class in abstraction. And so it was a I decided to use circles as a way to talk about connection and to learn about abstraction. And I did about, I think about 26 paintings, and they just like flowed right out of me. And then at some point, I realized that series started morphing into abstract work that looked more like abstract landscapes. I'm using landscapes really loosely. And so then I did a series that was called Prayers for the Earth. And so it was a little more, you could kind of tell they were more referenced with nature than being totally abstract. Sure. And then that series ended, and then I was kind of in that period of, what's next? Yeah. Right, yeah.
At that time, were you primarily painting 100% painting? Because this exhibition has paintings and drawings, mixed media drawings, as well as sculptural installations. Mm-hmm. Did the sculptural work, did that only emerge after facing the challenges health-wise?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I had only been painting. Some of them were mixed media paintings because I love texture. But I had never really made sculpture. I'd done a little bit of art furniture before I got injured previously, but this was really new for me. And I didn't really think about what I was doing, that it might be like over my head. I just had this idea, I want to make things out of these materials and have a show one day. That was like it.
And you didn't allow yourself to be intimidated by, well, I haven't done this before. I'm just going to do it.
It's crazy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that I've always had I'm not sure what the right term is, an ability to sort of see things 3D. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's helped me as I've started making sculptures. But I do find it much easier for me to visualize two-dimensional things in my mind than three-dimensional things. You add that third dimension and it's like, oh my God, how is this really going to look? I have no idea. And so then I started doing a little more sketching to kind of help myself visualize things.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to process. Do you essentially preconceive these artworks kind of in their totality and then set out to make them real? Or is there some stumbling / trial and error? Or do you work things out in preparatory drawings and then apply what you've learned in those drawings to the work? What's your process like?
Yeah, it really varies greatly depending on what it is that I'm working on. Previous to this series, I never really sketched out what I wanted to paint. And some of that is because when I started sketching out paintings, it felt too much like my design work, where I would plan carefully, and I didn't want that. I really appreciate my design skills, but sometimes I need to get the designer in the other room because I can be too constrained by design thinking. And so where's the line where the design thinking is good and when it's too much? And I just need to be freer.
Do you have an example of that? Like, I think I get a sense of it, but I think it's hard for folks, particularly maybe folks that don't engage in art making practice, to really get the design aspect to is it fair to say your expressive portion?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you have an example that you could point out?
Let me think.
I'm putting you on the spot.
You are putting me on the spot. That's all right, though.
It's kind of my job.
Yeah. Well, for instance, this isn't exactly it, but it's the most thing I can think of. So this series, because I wanted to use the arrangement of the circles to describe the passage of time, to describe a transformation, I did actually map out how the circles changed month to month, even though I didn't do a painting a month. They took longer than that. But in my mind, I felt it was important to know how that pattern was going to change, and I wanted it to make some sense, if no one else, to me. And sometimes it might not look this way to other people, but I can see that in this series. It just feels a little more constrained, whereas the black and white series had no idea what I was doing, had no idea what they were about. It was really, I want to make marks that please me, and I want to only work in black and white. To me, that series looks much looser than this series does. Yeah, and not to be too critical of myself, but I find that both skills are important. You know, if you've got both skills, then you can combine them in multiple ways. You know, it's another vocabulary. Yeah.
Can you tell us more about the veil? Visitors have been marveling at it, and I've heard multiple viewers remark on how it reminds them of origami cranes specifically. Have you got that before?
No,
Yeah.
I don't think so. I like that though.
And I know it's not that. And you know, I've looked at it, and I looked at your proposal, and I've been reading about it. But walk us through that piece in particular, if you could.
Like the idea of it?
The idea, and then also from ideation to creating it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what was the spark for that one?
I don't think there was any particular spark I can point to. I was really, really, really sick, and I spent 2 to 3 years mostly on the couch, really, and I was so bored out of my mind that all I could really do, most of what I could do, was to think about what I could do with these medical supplies. And I was having to use things every day as for various procedures, and I'm not sure. The idea just appeared.
And that was at the root of my curiosity. If you had used one of those wipes, set it down, and saw the light hit it in such a way, and you were like, "There it is. That's it." Or what it sounds like is you were generating these waste items,
Yes.
and you were like, it was a resourceful thing. Like, how
Yes.
might I repurpose these?
Yes.
And it wasn't that you saw it, but you were looking for a way to repurpose them. Is that?
In a really back of the mind way.
Sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
because I would, after I would use some supplies, there was this particular bag I would throw things into, and when I was really bored, I would go down the basement and I'd dump the bag out and I would start sorting things. And there was something about the act of sorting, so I was touching them, that in the back of my mind, I think I was working on it without consciously working on it. Sure. Yeah, and I didn't fully know what this piece would look like. It was just an idea, and then it was a few years before I was well enough to start making a few of the strings. It was maybe about 9, about 1 foot square. And then I could see, it was like, oh, I think I'm gonna like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something clicked.
Yeah, something clicked, but I still wasn't well enough to really, because I wanted it bigger. Originally I wanted it 8 feet wide, but last year I felt well enough to make a prototype that was about 2 by 2 wide and had some photographs made of it, and that was one of the photographs I submitted to you. And even when I got the photos from the photographer, it had a presence that I hadn't necessarily seen before. I mean, it almost sparkled. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that was going to do that. So it was a wonderful surprise.
Sure.
Yeah.
And some folks have commented on there's that tubing that is the foundation for each suspended string, but some have a red thread. And what drove that choice? Is there specific symbolism, or was it a design choice for some visual variety, or what can you say about that?
It probably started as a design choice. That just a little something to grab the eye and to help the viewer maybe move around looking for the other strings. You know, one could see it as blood, but that's a little gross. But it made sense.
Sure, yeah.
That makes sense.
It carries that meaning
Yes.
as well as others. And
Right.
so it's functioning both from a design standpoint, additional visual interest, but there's also some underpinning in the content.
Yes.
Dynamite. See, now I'll know what to say. Let's open it up to some questions.
So the main question is because you mentioned that that you were diagnosed with Lyme disease only by 2012, but you were painting all this since 2003. So it was not inspired by your mental health. By what then it was inspired by then?
I had been painting since 2003, but I didn't start this series until 2012, 2013.
Ah.
So it was after the onset of the health challenges. It was specifically in response to it?
No, the health challenges had started quite a bit before then.
Okay.
But they were so subtle that there weren't any like screaming red lights for the providers I went to. So 2012, I finally got the right provider who said, I think it's Lyme disease. Let's do some different tests. And they came back positive.
Sure. How did working on this art, if at all, change your relationship with your experience of health and illness?
It was positive. It was positive because it gave me a goal. It gave me something positive to focus on. Or for me, it was positive because I like making art and I like working with my hands and creating things.
Did you learn anything about health or illness as you were making it?
Yeah, I don't know if it was directly related to the art making per se, but maybe more about the process of the healing journey.
Yeah.
One thing, I'll come back to that. One thing that the art did, the making of the art did do for me is I thought it was very meditative, you know, especially the pieces that had more production work, very meditative. And I found myself thinking about other people who have chronic illness, have invisible disability, but it was in a very calm way, you know, like, how can I describe this? Like thoughts would just flow in and out. It wasn't in like a really focused way that I was thinking about these things, but it was a kinship of sorts in thinking about other people and going back to one of my original ideas in wanting to help bring awareness. I thought about that, and you know, maybe this work might help someone somehow, you know, to move through things in a different way. And going back to my first thought, the healing journey itself, oh boy, that's a big one. It taught me to be kinder to myself. I thought I was doing a pretty good job of that, but it really, when you get really sick, things get really clear quickly. And it helped me to focus more on what I could control and what I couldn't, and to be grateful even though I wasn't grateful about my health struggles, I could find other things that I was very grateful for, and to try to focus on those. What could I do with my mind that I could control, what I was thinking about, to help me through this journey?
Do you feel it contributed to healing?
I do. Yeah. The making of the work?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Right. It gave me, I was so focused on, I want to be able to do this show someday. You know, that was really, I'm sort of goal-oriented, and so it just gave me this something to focus on. And even though the steps were little, and sometimes it was 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I could just see, you know, bit by bit that I think I'm going to be able to do this. Yeah, which made me really happy.
Other questions?
I'm on a similar healing journey, so that your description there touched me greatly.
Thank you.
The question I have is, the materials for your sculpture seem to have found you, right? Are you exploring other materials to make pieces out of? Or are you waiting for something else to come up and knock on your door for you?
Do you mean, am I exploring other materials from my healing journey or beyond that?
Either way.
Either way.
I mean, the materials that you've got there have found you. Have you gotten proactive in any sense of what are some other materials that I find interesting
Yeah.
that I might want to be interacting with?
Yes, I do have some other ideas still whirling around in there from the medical supplies. Some ideas I've let go of because I started working on them and I realized, no, that's not quite right. And others I think I want to push a little more to see if it's going to work. But what I haven't really thought about is what's next. I was so focused on pulling this together, making it happen, and right now I'm kind of resting because it was a lot. Stressful, but good stress, you know. And so I'm not sure what's next. I'm a little perplexed that I'm making sculpture because I hadn't really done that. And so am I supposed to make more? Am I supposed to go back to painting? It's like, I'm not sure. So in some ways, I think I'm just sitting with everything and just kind of wait and see.
This is kind of a practical question, but
That's okay.
did you start with a black paper?
No,
and
it's white.
In white paper?
Yeah.
And then you must have painted the background black and then white?
No.
No?
It was a white mixed media paper, and I just used a lot of black paint. Yeah, paint and black pencil and black Conte crayon, and just lots of layers, many, many layers.
So interesting. Also, I'm really glad you're well now.
Thank you.
After being so ill.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I'm just wondering what your process is for working on such a huge piece. I mean, do you actually have a studio that's that big that you can climb on ladders around it, or how do you do it?
Right now, my studio is in our home, in part of the basement, but the ceiling is very low. And so that was constructed in our spare bedroom upstairs where there's a little bit of a vault. Yeah, and I would just get up on the ladder there and do that. Yeah.
Related to that question, a little inside baseball as far as the installation of it. So Gail had to transport it here, not assembled, and had to assemble it on site. So we brought a scissor lift in because we had to get it up there. Brought the scissor lift up, projected 2x4s off so that she could suspend that tray at the top and then hang each of those elements before we lifted it to the ceiling. And Chris Fram, building supervisor, was running the lift. We'll give him the props
great.
for that.
Yeah.
But it's one of those behind the scenes things that it was exciting.
It was.
Yeah.
It was a cool process.
And one other question, are you inclined to stay with the white only, or are you thinking about introducing color into your sculptures?
Yeah, for this piece, my intention is to keep it as it is. And then the orders, they're a little bit out of order, you know, sequentially. And so my thought was that it would start with color, then it would get pretty stark, black and white, and then this piece had a little bit of color, and that gradually I would start bringing in more color. I haven't totally thought that through in terms of future sculptures I might make for this body of work. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm intrigued by the way you used the medical supplies to convert into a sculpture. Did you see those bags as more than just utilitarian bags, or did you see them as both utilitarian and its shape and its whatever what it conformed to and what you could do with those things? If you find a nice looking box, it becomes both a box to hold something. At the same time, it stimulates a thought about what other boxes can be like and build from that. But sculpture is my area, and I just wonder if it has double meaning, the purpose and then the stimulation of other ideas.
Originally, I wasn't making that judgment at that point. I was just sorting by like kinds, and then I put each in their own bag, and then I just kept accumulating, much to my wife's dismay. And I was simultaneously seeing them as utilitarian, but also knowing that I wanted at some point to use them in my art somehow, even though I didn't know how. And certainly some objects seemed like they had more aesthetic possibilities than others. I have a ton of plastic syringes that contained saline solution when I had to clean out my PICC line. And for the life of me, I can't figure out what to do with those. I really want to figure it out, but everything just looks, yeah.
In a follow-up that I think maybe Bob was teasing or said, are you discovering aesthetic utility, unexpected aesthetic potential in other non-art materials in your daily existence that aren't related to the medical supplies?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah.
Not yet.
There's hope, Susan.
Right. There's as I'm resting now, but just in the back of my mind is more sculpture. I think that I'm trying to remain open.
Sure.
To that possibility. Yeah. Cool. But it was really handy to have all these supplies already coming in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Gail, can you talk a little bit about Still Dreaming?
Still Dreaming. That was the last piece that I made for this show. Finished it the week before it was time to hang it. And I had a PICC line and IV antibiotics for 3 years. And so, which meant that I would carry around a little black pouch that had a self-pumping bulb in it. And the bulb would be connected to my PICC line to administer antibiotics, IV antibiotics. And I was fascinated with these bulbs because they started off like that. And then when they finished, they were much flatter. At least the skin part of it was flatter, but there was always this column in the middle that gave it a little bit of dimension. And at some point, I decided it would be a good idea to start taking those pumps apart after they were empty to see what else was in there that I might be able to use. And when I took the core of it out, then the skins were really flat, at least most of them. I have several different kinds of skins depending on which drug they were having me take at the time. And so I had several ideas of what I could do with the skins. The first couple ones didn't quite work. And I got this idea of could I make something like a quilt, but it didn't need to be a quilt. That was just the word I was using to talk about it or think about it. And so then I thought about, well, how could I attach these skins to each other? And then something reminded me of, I could use wire, How could I use wire but have it look aesthetically pleasing? What about a jump ring like they use in making jewelry? And so it just sort of unfolded like that. And
were there many false steps? I mean, did you try other?
I tried other colors of jump rings.
Okay.
The gold ones, which I ended up using, I thought, I'm not using those. They're too like sparkly, and it just didn't feel right. I was going to use something much more muted. But as I worked on the piece and started seeing it more how, towards its finished stages, I realized that the gold jump rings, I don't know if I can even explain this. They brought a lightness to the piece, and the shadow box that it's in, it's just like this really light and airy, and I loved that. I really loved that. I felt like it helped transform them. And I don't know that I'm done with the skins. I'm not sure what else I'm going to try, but there's another brand that they had me on where now that the skin is taken apart, it looks like a big dried grape. So it doesn't just lie flat. And I would love to figure out what to do with those. Yeah.
Gail, thank you so much for
Yes.
sharing your work with our community.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
We've been speaking with Gail Wallinga about her exhibition, Emergence, Creativity, Illness, and Healing, on view now through December 1st.